He thought one kick would break her. He didn't know it would summon 40 reasons to regret it. Before we begin, if you're new to stories that expose the darkest corners of the human spirit and the most powerful acts of redemption, you've found your home. Subscribe and join our community of over 1 million people who believe that justice, no matter how delayed, always arrives. To kick wasn't just an act of violence. It was a punctuation mark in a sentence of pure hatred. It was meant to be the final word. The boy in the blue and yellow varsity jacket, his face a twisted mask of rage, drove the sole of his pristine sneaker directly toward the face of the girl sitting on the cold linoleum floor. Her name was Lily, and she was tied up, not with metaphorical bonds of fear or insecurity, but with a thick, coarse rope that dug cruelly into the wrist she had crossed behind her back. A fresh, angry scar traced a path from her temple to her jawline, a stark pink line against her pale skin. Her eyes, wide and glassy with a terror so profound it seemed to swallow the very light from the hallway, were locked on her attacker. She couldn't raise her hands to defend herself. She couldn't scramble away. All she could do was brace for the impact, a flinch that started in her soul and radiated through her entire fragile body. The hallway, just moments before a river of chatter, locker slams, and the mundane energy of an American high school between classes, froze into a silent, horrifying tableau. Students heading to their next period stopped dead. A girl with a stack of textbooks gasped, her hands flying to her mouth, her geometry book hitting the floor with a thunderous slap that no one seemed to hear. Others pressed themselves back against the banks of blue lockers, as if trying to physically distance themselves from the ugliness unfolding before them. Their faces were a mosaic of shock, of pity, of a gut-wrenching powerlessness. They were witnessing something monstrous, and the social contract of their world had just been shattered by a single, brutal act. This was the domain of Kyle, the jock, the golden boy, and this was his demonstration of power. The impact was a sickening thud. Lily's head snapped back, connecting with the metal locker behind her with a dull, metallic clang. A fresh trickle of blood, rich and red, immediately welled from her nostril, tracing a path over her lip and down her chin. She didn't cry out. The sound that escaped her was a choked gurgle, the air forced from her lungs by the force of the blow. A single, hot tear escaped the corner of her eye, cutting a clean path through the grime of the floor that coated her cheek. Kyle stood over her, his chest heaving, not from exertion but from the pure, unfiltered adrenaline of his cruelty. He smirked, a look of supreme satisfaction. "That's what happens when you can't watch where you're going, you useless cripple," he spat, the words dripping with venom. To understand the depth of this moment, you have to understand Lily. She wasn't always the girl on the floor. Just 6 months ago, Lily was the girl with paint under her fingernails and a sketchbook perpetually tucked under her arm. She was the one who could capture the soul of a person with a few deft strokes of charcoal, whose laughter was a quiet, melodic sound that made you want to lean in closer. Her disability, a degenerative muscular condition that had slowly stolen the strength from her legs, confining her to a wheelchair, was a part of her, but it wasn't her. She navigated the halls of Northwood High with a quiet dignity, her world a smaller, more challenging landscape than that of her peers, but one she navigated with fierce intelligence and a resilient heart. The scar on her face was not from her condition. It was a relic of the car accident that had claimed her mother's life 2 years prior, the same accident that had accelerated the weakening of her legs. She lived with her older brother, the two of them clinging to each other in a house that felt too big and too quiet. And then there was Kyle, the archetype of high school royalty, captain of the wrestling team. His varsity jacket was a suit of armor, his swagger a weapon. He came from money, from a family where success was measured in trophies and dominance. His father, a local business magnate, had bred into him a single brutal lesson. The world is divided into predators and prey, and in the ecosystem of Northwood High, Kyle was the apex predator. He had targeted Lily not for any reason, but precisely because there was no reason. She was vulnerable. She was different. She was an easy target who couldn't fight back in the ways he understood. His taunts had started small, mocking the slow whir of her electric wheelchair, accidentally bumping into it, calling her Rolls Royce. But over time, the harassment had escalated, fueled by her refusal to break, to give him the satisfaction of seeing her cry. The incident that led to this hallway atrocity had happened just an hour before. Lily was trying to get to her art class, maneuvering her wheelchair through a particularly crowded section of the hall. Kyle and his pack of friends were holding court, blocking the way. As she tried to politely excuse herself past, Kyle stumbled, his foot slipping into the path of her chair. The chair jolted, and the corner of it scraped against the leather of his $200 sneaker, leaving a faint, almost invisible mark. The reaction was instantaneous and volcanic. He erupted. He screamed in her face, calling her a blind, pathetic mess, his spittle misting her glasses. A teacher, Mr. Davison, had intervened, pulling a still, fuming Kyle away and giving Lily a wary, sympathetic look. "Just try to be more careful, Lily," he'd said, a hollow platitude that was the standard administrative response to Kyle's brand of terror. The injustice of it burned in Lily's gut. She wasn't careful enough. She had been trying to navigate a world not built for her, and she was the one who needed to be more careful. But Kyle wasn't finished. The public reprimand, however mild, was an unforgivable challenge to his authority. Revenge was not just a desire, it was a necessity. He watched her, he waited. He knew her schedule. He knew she had a free period last, often spending it in the quiet of the library on the second floor. He knew the elevator was out for maintenance. He knew she would have to take the long way around, through the less traveled East Wing hallway, to use the ramp at the far end. He laid his trap there. He and two of his most loyal lackeys cornered her. They used the same thick, rough rope they'd used for a strength training exercise in gym class. They were quick, efficient. They dragged her from her chair, her legs buckling beneath her. She fought a wild, desperate struggle, her nails scratching at their arms, a raw, guttural scream tearing from her throat. But they were too strong. They tied her hands behind her back, the rope biting deep. One of them, a hulking boy named Derek, held her down while Kyle leaned in close, his breath hot on her ear. "You scraped my shoe, you little freak," he whispered. "Now you're going to learn what a real accident feels like." It was then he produced a small, sharp pocket knife. Not to cut the ropes. He pressed the tip against her cheek, just below her existing scar. "Let's give you a matching set," he sneered, and with a quick, cruel motion, he dragged the blade down. That was the origin of the fresh scar. The pain was searing, white-hot. It was a violation that went deeper than the skin. Then they left her there, sitting on the floor, propped against the lockers, utterly helpless. They took her wheelchair and hid it in a janitor's closet, laughing as they walked away. That's where she was when Kyle returned, alone, for the final act. He wanted no witnesses for the culmination of his revenge. He wanted to look into her eyes as he broke her. He stood before her, a colossus of malice, and delivered his monologue of hate. She didn't beg, she didn't plead. She just stared up at him, her one good eye swelling from the new cut, her gaze a mixture of terror and a flicker of something else, something that unnerved him. Defiance. It was that flicker, that refusal to be completely extinguished, that finally triggered the kick. He needed to see it go out. As the echo of the kick faded, a new sound began to permeate the stunned silence of the hallway. It started as a low, distant rumble like far-off thunder. But it grew steadily, insistently. It wasn't thunder. It was the synchronized, deafening growl of dozens of motorcycle engines. The sound swelled, rolling over the school campus, vibrating through the very foundations of the building. It was a sound that didn't belong, a primal, invasive force. The students frozen in the hallway began to stir, their attention torn from the horrifying scene on the floor to the windows at the end of the hall. Their expressions shifted from horror to confusion, then to a dawning, wide-eyed awe. Kyle heard it too. The smirk on his face faltered. The sound was wrong. It was too loud, too many. It was organized. He took a step back from Lily, his bravado momentarily punctured by a spike of primal unease. The roar of the engines didn't pass by the school. It converged on it. It moved from the perimeter road to the student parking lot, the sound becoming an overwhelming, earth-shaking cacophony. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The abrupt silence that followed was somehow more terrifying than the noise. It was the silence of held breath of impending action. From the main entrance of the school, 100 yards down the hall from where Kyle stood, the double doors burst open, not with a violent crash but with a slow, deliberate, an immensely powerful swing. And then they came in. Not one or two, not a small group, a flood, A sea of leather denim and weathered skin, bikers 40 of them, men and women, their faces etched with the lines of hard roads and hard lives. They wore the colors of a club, a patch on the back of their vests depicting a snarling wolf's head with the words, Steel Ghosts SMC, arched above it. They moved with a grim, purposeful stride, their heavy boots creating a unified, ominous drumbeat on the linoleum that echoed through the now silent institution. The students parted before them like the Red Sea, pressing themselves against the lockers, their mouths agape. This wasn't a movie. This was real. The air grew thick with the smell of leather, oil, and cold, hard intent. The bikers didn't look at the students. Their collective gaze was fixed down the hallway, on one specific point. On the girl sitting on the floor. On the boy standing over her. Kyle's face, just moments ago flushed with triumphant rage, underwent a horrifying transformation. The color drained from his skin, leaving him a ghastly pale shade of gray. His jaw went slack, his eyes, wide with a terror he had never known possible, darted across the advancing wall of leather-clad muscle. His brain, so adept at calculating social dynamics and wrestling holds, short-circuited. This was a variable his world had no room for. This was a force of nature he could not bully, could not intimidate, could not reason with. The bikers formed a semicircle around the scene, a wall of silent, imposing judgment. They completely blocked the hallway, a phalanx of grim faces. And then, from the center of their ranks, one man stepped forward. He was older than the others, his hair gray at the temples, his face a roadmap of scars and sun. He was broad-shouldered, and he moved with an economy of motion that screamed of controlled, lethal power. His eyes, a piercing, ice blue, swept over Lily, taking in the rope, the blood, the fresh scar, the terror in her eyes. A muscle in his jaw twitched. Then, those same eyes locked onto Kyle. The man took 2 slow, deliberate steps forward, closing the distance. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The sheer, concentrated aura of menace radiating from him was a physical pressure. Kyle took an involuntary step back, his heel catching on Lily's abandoned backpack, making him stumble. He was a child facing down a wolf. "Did you do this?" the man asked. His voice was quiet, gravelly, but it cut through the silence like a razor. It wasn't a shout. It was something far, far worse. It was a calm, deadly inquiry. Kyle tried to speak. A pathetic, strangled squeak was all that emerged. He tried again, his voice a trembling whisper. "Ooh, who are you?" The man ignored the question. His eyes never left Kyle's. "I asked you a question, boy. Did you this?" He gestured with a slight tilt of his head toward Lily, who was now looking up, her one good eye wide with a new, different kind of shock. A recognition. A massive biker, built like a refrigerator with a long braided beard, knelt down beside Lily. His hands, which looked like they could crush cinder blocks, were impossibly gentle as he produced a Bowie knife from his belt. He didn't brandish it. He simply used it to carefully, delicately, slice through the ropes binding her wrists. As the ropes fell away, deep, angry red grooves were revealed in her skin. The big man's face, which had seemed so fearsome, softened into an expression of profound pity and rage. He carefully helped her to her feet, supporting her weight as her weakened legs trembled. "It's okay, Lily girl," he rumbled, his voice a low, comforting thunder. "We're here now. Uncle Bear's here." The leader, the man with the ice, blue eyes, took another step toward Kyle, who was now shaking uncontrollably. "My name is Jax," the man said, his voice still dangerously quiet. "And that," he said, pointing to Lily without looking away from Kyle, "is my little sister's daughter, my niece." The revelation hit the hallway like a shockwave. Whispers rippled through the crowd of students. Her uncle, Lily never talked about family. The story everyone knew was that it was just her and her brother, a quiet college student named Mark. Jax continued, his gaze pinning Kyle in place. "Her mother, my sister, she chose a different life. A quiet life. She didn't want this." He gestured to the bikers around him for her kids. "We respected that. We kept our distance. We watched from afar. We sent money. We made sure she and Mark were taken care of, even after the accident." His voice hardened. "But we also made a promise. A promise that if anyone ever laid a hand on either of them, our distance would end." Immediately, he leaned in close, so close Kyle could smell the leather and faint scent of tobacco on him. "We got a call 10 minutes ago from Mark. He got a text from his sister, a single word, help, and a location. We were 5 miles away. It took us 9 minutes to get here. Jax's eyes narrowed to slits. You have 9 seconds to explain to me why I shouldn't let my club tear this entire school apart with you at the center of it. The world had shrunk for Kyle to this single point of terror. The bravado, the entitlement, the smug superiority. It all evaporated, leaving only the raw, naked fear of a boy who had finally met a power he could not comprehend. He'd started to cry fat, pathetic tears rolling down his ashen cheeks. He tried to form words, to lie, to excuse, but all that came out were choke sobs. He was utterly, completely broken. What happened next was not the violent, bloody retribution the students might have expected, and perhaps that Kyle deserved. Jax looked at him, this weeping, broken thing, with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. He saw the emptiness behind the cruelty. He turned to the big biker, Bear, who was now holding Lily, supporting her weight as she leaned into him, sobbing quietly into his leather vest. "Get her chair," Jax commanded softly. 2 other bikers immediately moved, finding the janitor's closet and retrieving her wheelchair. They brought it over, and Bear gently lowered her into it. Jax then turned his attention to the crowd of students, his gaze sweeping over them. "Which one of you is the principal?" he asked, his voice carrying easily in the silent hall. A trembling man in a cheap suit, Mr. Hendricks, was nudged forward by the students. He had been watching from the periphery of the crowd, his face a mask of sheer panic. I am," he stammered. Jax looked at him for a long, cold moment. "You have failed this girl," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You have allowed a cancer to grow in your school. That ends today." He pointed a finger at Kyle, who was now slumped against the lockers, a broken mess. "He will be expelled. He will be charged with assault, unlawful restraint, and anything else the law can throw at him. And you will make sure of it." He then looked back at his club, a silent command passing between them. They began to move, forming a protective phalanx around Lily's wheelchair. They weren't there to burn the place down. They were there to extract their own. They were there to deliver a message, and the message had been received. As they began to move down the hall, a path clearing before them, Jax stopped one last time. He looked at the students, at their shocked, young faces. "Look around you," he said, his voice softer now, but still resonant. "This is what happens when good people do nothing. This is what happens when you see something and you say nothing. You are all witnesses now. Be better?" And with that, the Steel Ghosts Motorcycle Club escorted Lily out of Northwood High. They didn't look back. They loaded her into a modified van. And the thunder of their engines roared to life once more, this time not as a sound of menace, but as a sound of liberation, fading into the distance as they carried their wounded bird away from her cage. The aftermath was seismic. Kyle was, indeed, expelled. His family, for all their local influence, was powerless against the sworn statements of dozens of students who finally found their courage, and against the looming, unspoken threat of the Steel Ghosts. He faced juvenile court, and the judge, unmoved by his family's pleas, handed down a sentence that included community service at a physical rehabilitation center, a poetic justice that forced him to confront the world he had so cruelly mocked. Lily never returned to Northwood High. She was homeschooled, finishing her senior year in the safety of her brother's house, which now saw regular, rumbling visits from her uncles and aunts of the road. The scar on her cheek never fully faded, but it became a badge not of victimhood, but of survival, a reminder of the day the world, in its most unexpected form, had ridden in to save her. She went on to college, studying art therapy, using her own pain to help others heal. The flicker of defiance that Kyle had seen in her eyes, it became a steady flame. The story of the 40 bikers who stormed a school to save a disabled girl became local legend, then an internet sensation. It was a story about the families we are born into, and the families we choose. It was a story about the quiet strength of a girl who refused to be broken, and the roaring, leather-clad power that answered her silent cry for help. It was a story that proved that sometimes justice doesn't wear a badge. Sometimes it wears a worn leather vest and rides on 2 wheels. This story of a quiet victim and her unlikely army resonates differently depending on where you hear it. The values of community resilience and fierce loyalty are universal, yet feel uniquely American. It makes me wonder, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Are you from the rugged, independent Rockies, the community-hearted Midwest, the proud and storied South? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one.